Hello, everybody, and welcome to the main event. Today, in our tag team match, we've got NetApp and Red Hat versus Data Center and Cloud Inefficiencies. In the blue trunks from NetApp, we've got Sandra Nicholson and Ken Jarris. In the red trunks from Red Hat, we've got Trey Prinz, who they'll be presenting on their joint solutions around storage automation. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Sandra, who's going to get us kicked off.
Hi, and thanks for that introduction, Matt. It sounds like we are a 2-on-1 tag team against or in partnership with Trey. We're really excited to be presenting today, and I'm going to just go ahead and get started. I'll go ahead and share my screen. And just a little bit about me for those that don't know me, I'm Sandra Nicholson. I am a NetApp SLED-specific pre-sales solutions engineer. I've been with NetApp for about 8 years. I've been in IT for many, many years, let's say as far back as when Stone Cold Steve Austin was the champion wrestler, because I follow wrestling. Back when it was WWF.
Sandra, you get an extra point for every professional wrestler you can sneak into your presentation.
Uh-oh, I'm on it then.
Got one.
So during the presentation, I will be joined by my tag team partner, Ken Jarris. I'm sure that he is also a wrestling fan, so I'm sure he'll have some wrestlers to come up with. We'll be focusing our topic today around automation with NetApp and the hybrid multi-cloud. But first, we all know the world is changing, especially with COVID. We hear our customers, and even within NetApp ourselves, One Technology, and I'm sure Red Hat, are having to transform, and not only transform, but transform faster than expected. And of course, with this transformation, we see it at NetApp requiring first the need for change. COVID is a great example of that need for transforming. And then we know you need to have the intent to change. And then finally, in combination, the ability to execute on that transformation. Although we're not really focusing on DevOps today, DevOps is really the first in a long line of applications for transformation to utilize automation. And so today we'll focus a little bit as examples on DevOps with automation, but keep in mind that automation is performed across multiple different applications and needs. And it really starts with the data, right? So using DevOps as an example, it requires and it creates a huge amount of data during every iteration of, as you can see, this data lifecycle. It generates more and more data with each version. In the example of DevOps, every time an application changes, it creates new data. And the faster you move through these life cycles through your automation, the faster and the more data that you will have. And sometimes this is really called data intensity, just the amount of data. But it's really around the requirement, right, to develop applications, even updating systems, and really to understand the state of your digital assets, wherever they may be, because data is central to all of this. And because there's so much data, you know, NetApp is a leader in data efficiency. And it's really that key need to be efficient with your data and utilize data efficiencies to be successful in the long term of your data management, and ultimately being able to transform with automation. Here are some examples of where being different helps you to deliver those applications faster. Utilizing new technologies such as containers with Kubernetes and microservices. These are the key ingredients, whether you're utilizing native cloud applications or moving into more of an AI or ML environment to make your data work better for you. Ultimately, it's about being able to inspire and innovate the cultural change. And this is what we see our customers and even internal to NetApp doing to help with transformation utilizing automation. First, it requires really being able to set expectations from your internal customers, right? So today, when your customers from an application standpoint make a request, it's typically they ask for the request from you, they have to wait a certain amount of time, and then finally they'll get their request. But what automation will allow you to do is to complete those tasks much faster. With automating your applications, you will now be able to create things like self-provisioning and then self-monitoring. And your customers will be able to receive their requests much faster. And that's really what they want, to be able to deliver and utilize the applications of your business as quickly as possible, being as effective as possible. At NetApp, we kind of break this into 6 primary focus areas, really around configuration management, and that's what we're going to talk more about today during Red Hat when Trey talks more about Ansible. That's one of the tools that we utilize in managing your configuration for starting automation, as an example. Of course, you start looking at containers, right? Because containers are more portable, and they also allow better support for multiple applications or your multi-factor applications. Of course, the environment that you're running these applications in is to support that developer and those application needs. So people are utilizing more of cloud applications or platforms as a service. And you can't forget things like continuous integration and continuous delivery to be able to automate and stream your data from the commitment of your code all the way up to the development of your code. And finally, I want to touch on the analytics and metrics, because as you utilize your data, you want to learn from your data, and that's where the analytics come into play. And it helps you to provide insights into what's really happening with your data, and ultimately to be able to respond faster and more effective. Because if you can't measure it, then you definitely can't manage it. So you want to invest in this partnership that allows you to be able to move quickly in your transformation journey. Here are just some of the solutions that we at NetApp partner with and utilize to help these different, as an example, of resources to be able to be more agile. Things like utilizing hyperscalers to build and migrate their applications from either a storage administrator or application developer, and even cloud architects. And we have solutions at NetApp partnered with Red Hat to be able to help our customers to deliver their needs much faster. One example is our NetApp HCI solution. It supports containers and microservices. It helps you to automate your infrastructure and to deploy your applications faster. Things like Trident, which is a free tool that allows persistent storage utilizing in the cloud. And this is just what we are doing to help our customers to be able to deliver and transform faster. We're going to talk about this more, definitely, Trey, but from an Ansible standpoint, NetApp has developed over 60 modules for Ansible for our portfolio. So there's modules for both ONTAP as well as Element OS, which is our SolidFire HCI foundation platform. The Pub, which is our site of great resources, please visit that at netapp.io. It provides detailed information on some of our modules, how we're working with Ansible, also Trident, and additional development operations and other great valuable sources of information to help in your automation transformation. And this isn't something that we just talk about. We actually have customers that are doing this today. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Ken Jarris to talk more about some of our success stories. Ken?
So Sandra, I'll have you switch back real quick because I'm going to add some color commentary additional to the introduction on this part. So if you want to go back real quick, thank you. Yeah, stay there.
Absolutely, thank you.
No problem. So we've been talking about Ansible and the use of the Pub as a launch point. Actually, to update Sandra, I just took a look at this the other night. We are now at 90 plus modules for ONTAP. We do have it not just for Element, but we also have integration with Ansible for also our E-Series. So all of our storage offerings from NetApp are available to be leveraged in an automated space with using Ansible. The other that we've introduced are also the roles that have been introduced with Ansible, which makes it easier to make automation easier. Ansible introduced roles with the, I think it was current version and one release back, that allows us to take those modules and wrap them into a easier consumable model. So we've actually built some roles like around deploying a cluster, for example, for ONTAP. So I don't have to worry about pulling in all the different modules that I have to leverage. I just invoke that role and it makes it a lot easier. I've been working with a lot of our customers around the VMware space to get that automation going. Now, while VMware does have its own automation tool, customers are looking for something that perhaps a little more robust outside of the VMware environment and dealing with that, and that's where Ansible plays very nicely. And we've been working with that space to work with customers around how to make it easier to get their operations running and get their development environments running, for example. We use that in our own use at NetApp IT, but the Pub is a starting point you can get started with because there's also a Slack channel that you can also ask your questions. And while our folks at One Technology can also help you get started with this, if you want to switch to the next slide, Sandra. You have control, yep. There we go. We have a couple other examples around this. Hughes is one. They're deploying it. This is part of their space division. They've been able to do things, take things from 2 to 3 weeks, and take this down to a matter of hours for how fast they can deploy things now with the automation pieces. So this gets us an example of how we can actually save time to get things done, consistently, because that's the other thing about automation, is that we're actually doing things on a consistent basis and repeated. So I can actually make sure I'm not getting lapses in process or lapses in consistency in our environment. So if you've got standards you're trying to get enforced, what happens when you bring someone new on board? You have to train them on what your standards are and what your guidelines are around, hey, these are the naming standards we may have come up with for things in our environment, whether it be VM names, whether it be host names, whether it be switch names, or even on the storage side, volume names, for example, and share names at that level of granularity. So if you want that type of consistency around that, rather than have to continually repeat this every time someone new comes on board on the staff, then you end up being able to leverage this much easier by doing it through automation. That's where a lot of customers I've worked with have been doing that. I have a finance company down here. I'm based in Phoenix, and that actually gives the capability that they're looking to make it more consistent around how they deploy ONTAP clusters, for example. And also they're looking at how they address some of their user requests around file shares. So they can actually make that a more automated process than this is the way they're doing it today, where the user requests a ticket, it gets assigned, one of the storage admins goes off and looks to see if they have the space available and do the capabilities of creating the share and responding back to the customer. So rather than doing that in about maybe 2 or 3 days, depending upon the workload of that particular admin, they can actually automate that process where through that they can actually make that in a matter of minutes and have the user make that easier. The thing that's been driving a lot of these, and Sandra, I know you experience this with your customers as well. What's been driving a lot of this is what's going on in the cloud, how easy it is to consume, and this is exactly what these customers are leveraging Ansible for, to make their on-premises data center act like a cloud endpoint. So to the consumers, which is your end users, it doesn't matter whether they go to Amazon and fill in a form, or they're filling in a form within, say, ServiceNow, and then actually that ticket gets logged and automatically processed through Ansible. So a little bit more about what is Ansible and dealing with that. We talked about why we can leverage this and how ONTAP is and how our NetApp features are built with Ansible. We'll turn this over to Trey, and he can actually take us through the steps that give us some more insight as to what is Ansible and give us more background on why Ansible is being consumed by a lot of our customers today.
Hey, Trey.
Yes.
Can you smell what Sandra and Ken are cooking?
Great.
Oh,
Now we're tied, Sandra.
I'm thinking of another one.
You guys step into an Ansible module. Oh yeah.
There it is.
Oh man. So can you guys see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks, Sandra and Ken and Matt. Appreciate it. So yeah, I'm the guy in the red trunks, and actually today I'm wearing a red shirt. I have to confess, but I did at least don red for the event. My name is Trey Prinz, and like Sandra, I'm a pre-sales architect, and I also work with our state, local, and education customers. I've been with Red Hat for almost 4 years and focus really a lot around automation and container technologies. So Sandra was talking a little bit about DevOps, and I think one of the key goals with DevOps is really to improve your efficiency. So how quickly can I get a new application version out? How quickly can I provision a new system? That sort of thing. And so what I often see when I talk to customers is that, when you look at automation, which is a key part of that in driving that efficiency, I'll find that, there is automation going on, but a lot of times it's really just individual users or maybe individual teams. It's not uncommon to talk to folks, and you might have like the Linux team, they've got some bash shell scripting going on to help them out with configuration management. And so that certainly helps at the team level. Sometimes part of the issue there is just the knowledge around that. So, there may be one team member that really understands Bash well, knows the ins and outs of that script, but other people really don't understand what it does. So it's going on kind of, it sort of, depends on how much and who's doing it, that sort of thing. But to really be effective, you really want to expand that and see automation take place across the different disciplines in the organization. So not just the teams that are doing server provisioning, but also the security team for scanning systems to make sure that they're compliant, the storage teams, the networking teams, that sort of thing. And when you start to take a look at it from that venue, you can really start to affect the change in terms of efficiency and really drive that across the organization. So when you look at potential tools for automation, one that's really bold to the top over the last few years is Ansible. And I think there's a few reasons for that. One of those is when you look at the learning curve, it's not very steep at all. Ansible is pretty simple to learn and come up to speed on. In fact, we conduct workshops on a pretty regular basis that are about a half a day. And if you know nothing about Ansible, after 4 hours, you come out of that understanding enough Ansible to actually write some automation that it's truly meaningful. So that's one aspect of it. The other thing, when you look at the architecture of Ansible, something that's a little bit different than maybe other tools that you've used is that it is agentless. So that means that it can work with things like storage systems, like NetApp systems and network switches. So things like that, that you really can't go in and install an agent. So when you look at those two components, then it really provides a foundation for doing some pretty powerful things. And so this is an example, but oftentimes what I see where people really get started are things around like provisioning. So that might include, I want to provision a new Linux system on VMware, or provision a Windows system in AWS or another cloud provider. But it can also mean things like, I want to provision a new storage virtual machine in my ONTAP system, and I want to configure a volume in there that is then exported to my application server, for example. Or I want to configure something new within my network switch or my switching environment. I have one customer, they're working on automation to make sure that all of their servers, regardless of whether they're Windows systems or Linux systems, are CIS compliant. So they're building out automation using Ansible that will kick off a scan every 30 minutes and look at all the systems in their environment, make sure that they're compliant, and then if they're not, bring them back into compliance as well. So again, really broad spectrum of the kinds of things that you can do. And so a tool like Ansible really lends itself to a DevOps kind of environment because it does encompass all of these different disciplines. I mentioned the fact that Ansible has really grown in popularity, and there's some statistics here on this slide, but I like to show this mainly for one particular metric, which is the number of modules up on the upper right-hand side. So you can see there's about 4,000 what are called modules, and I think Ken and Sandra referenced those earlier, but these are really the things that do the work within the Ansible ecosystem. And so we looked at that broad spectrum of applicability, and then when we look at the number of modules, what this really means is now with that ecosystem, we can support a bunch of different environments. And so you can see Windows systems, Red Hat Linux systems, you can see under storage, NetApp storage systems are supported, and just a variety of systems that you can support. Essentially, the way to look at it is If you have something on the network and it's something Ansible can reach out to, then that it's something that you could automate with Ansible. All right, so with that, then in terms of the product itself and really the platform, I guess, you know, the layers of the cake here really divided into 3 components. So the first level down on the bottom is what we call Ansible Engine. So this provides the framework, really the foundation. So it's the actual automation language itself. With that, you actually write your automation and then you can execute it at the command line. So that's kind of like the basic building block, if you will. Then if we move up 1 level, you see Ansible Tower there. So as you start to build out the automation, you know, at an individual level or maybe at a team level, using something like Ansible Engine with the command line, you know, probably works okay. But as you start to grow and you start to really bring automation to the organization, you want some more control and you want some more visibility into that. And so that's where Ansible Tower fits into the picture. And I'll touch a little bit more on that in a moment. And then finally, we also offer a software as a service called Ansible Hosted Services. So this is something that is available on our website. If you're using Ansible Tower, then you can opt in and have it send metrics and information to the hosted service. And by doing that, you can now gain visibility, not just within, say, a team, for example, within your organization, but across the whole company or across the whole agency, if you will. So you can see all your different instances of Ansible Tower that are running. You can see what automations are being carried out the most, who's doing the most automation, that sort of thing. So that's one thing. The other thing that's part of that is what's called the Automation Hub, which is really a place where partners like NetApp, for example, can contribute their modules, and so you can easily gain access to them. So what I'm going to do is I'll focus on the bottom 2 layers for today, and I want to first jump in a little bit and talk about Ansible Engine and really talk about the language itself. Okay, so again, so this is really the foundational level, and when you look at building out automation as a user, you know, you're on the left-hand side there. There's a couple of things that you feed into it. So one of those is what's called the playbook, and the playbook is really just the thing that you write that describes what it is you want to happen on your set of endpoints. And again, that could be a storage system, Linux system, Windows system, you know, whatever it is that you happen to be targeting. So that list of systems then is also contained in what's called an inventory. So those are really the 2 pieces that you work on and feed into the engine itself. So if we look at the playbooks then and dive into them a little bit. So these are written in a language called YAML. So it's a markup language. And inside of that file, what you do is specify a list of tasks. And these tasks are just executed in sequential order against the inventory, against the host that you want to target. So we take a peek then at an example playbook. So this is shown here. And I think if you look at it, I think you'll find that it's pretty straightforward. You could probably figure out what this particular playbook is doing. And in this case, what we're doing is we're targeting an ONTAP system. We're going to create a new storage virtual machine that supports NFS. And you can see in a way the structure of this file. So if we look in the top or left-hand side, the playbook file itself consists of a number of what are called plays. So this first name here is the start of our first play. And then every play will have some number of tasks. And so that started here with this keyword called tasks. And then below that, you just have a list of tasks that you want to execute against the remote systems. So then in here, the thing that I think is important and really what contributes to the simplicity of Ansible is that when you look at this file, I think, again, you can look at it and see what it is that you're doing. But the thing to note is really, you're just saying, hey, this is what I want the system to look like. You're really not having to understand under the covers what's really going on. And that's really the purpose of the whole module ecosystem that we referenced earlier. So that's the ecosystem where there's 4,000 modules with, that encompasses everything from NetApp storage system to Cisco switching devices, that sort of thing. So the module is the thing that you're using, that you're invoking, and it takes care of all the hard work underneath the covers. So here, the module that we're using is one called NA-ONTAP SVM, and then we're just providing a set of parameters. So if we go back and look at this, if you're a NetApp admin, these are probably familiar to you. If you go create a new SVM, you'll need to give it a name. You'll need to provide a root volume name, list of aggregates that are going to use, things like that. And you can see how they're specified here. It's really just a list of parameters and values associated with that. If you were to go to the command line to do this, you would know that there's a command called vserver, and you would say vserver add, and then there's a bunch of switches that you would provide, and then specify the values that way. And so the modules really hide all that. They abstract that. So that's the first component, and Ken referenced something called roles within Ansible. And I won't touch on them too much, but just briefly, if you think about writing a playbook like this, so here I'm creating an SVM. I may have another task in here that is going to create a volume. We're going to create an export policy and apply that, a few other things. So what I might wind up with then is this playbook that's kind of generic that I might want to use in multiple situations. You can use a playbook like that, but one easy way to share the automation that you've written and make it available to others is essentially go through a process where you take the playbook itself and you decompose it into a set of smaller files and directories, and that becomes what's called a role. And then within a playbook, you can reference that role, and it actually greatly shortens the playbook itself. But it provides a way then for you to share what you've done and make sure that, like, for example, if I'm going to use something that you've written, it's always done in a consistent manner. Okay, so the playbook is the first piece of that, like I mentioned. The other thing then is specifying the inventory, and there's a couple of ways to do that. So here on the left-hand side, we're specifying an inventory using a text file, and you can see the syntax with the brackets where this actually defines a group of systems. So here I have a storage group, or a group called storage, and it has just one system inside of it, just my ONTAP cluster. Cluster itself may have multiple HA pairs, but this might be like my cluster admin interface, for example. And then here in a similar manner, we have a group called web with a couple of web servers and so forth and so on. So basically my inventory, think of it as potentially having everything in the environment that you might actually want to automate against, if you will. So specifying a text file is one way to do it, but given that things are obviously dynamic in environments, what I find is most people are going to reference another source for their inventory. And so one thing you could do is reference, for example, a cloud provider. So if you're using Amazon, for example, you can query Amazon and say, hey, give me all of the instances that are owned by this username, for example, and that will be the basis of your inventory. And so every time you run automation, it can refresh that list and make sure that it's always up to date. I'll also see people tie in with whatever their CMDB is and populate that as well. So there's a known source of truth that they can go to and draw that inventory out of that. And then also, as things are provisioned, they can work back with that CMDB and make sure that it's updated as well. So in terms of playbooks, there's a ton of examples out there. So these are just some sites. I think you can easily Google and find examples of playbooks and also roles as well. So if you want to take advantage of roles, there's a site called Ansible Galaxy. They have a lot of roles, and Red Hat actually contributes to that site as well, especially with things like security scanning for Red Hat systems. Okay, so that's really the foundation. So that's the Ansible language itself. We didn't really get into running anything on the command line, but once you build that playbook, then you could actually execute it at the command line. So you would provide the playbook and the inventory, and then your automation would run. So again, as we grow, that's where we really start to see folks wanting something that gives them a little bit more control over what's going on and visibility into what's going on. And that's where Ansible Tower fits into the picture. I mean, if you think about it, you've got maybe the security team, and they're the domain experts in security. They know what it takes to put together a playbook that's going to go evaluate a system and make sure that it is compliant. Same thing with the storage team. They know exactly how to go out and configure a brand new storage virtual machine. So they've got all that expertise. So they can be developing that independently. But now the question is, how do we marry that and do so in a very efficient way? And Ansible Tower allows you to do that. So, and it does that through concepts like role-based access control, so that you can divide things up, make sure that people aren't doing things that they shouldn't be doing, as well as visibility into what automation is being run, what sort of failures, successes you have, that sort of thing. So just to highlight a few of the things that that Tower provides, and just from the context of what I see. So like one of the customers that I work with, they use ServiceNow for their ticketing environment. And so their goal was for users to be able to go to ServiceNow, open a new ticket that says, I want a new system, say a new Windows system. And they may have some options around the size, like small, medium, large, and a few other things that they can customize. And then from there, ServiceNow would actually kick off that Ansible automation. And so it does that by using the REST API that's provided by Ansible Tower. So that's one way to integrate and actually build out your automation. Some of the other things that are built into Ansible Tower are more sophisticated workflows. So instead of running just a single playbook, you have the ability to build out a workflow where you can run multiple playbooks, and you can make decisions on what playbooks are going to be executed based on the success or failure of a previous playbook. Another thing that's critical in an environment like this is really just visibility. So when we get into Ansible Tower, you'll see that when you run automation within the Tower environment, you see what's going on, everything is logged, but that's all kept as well. So you can go back, you can search through the logs, and you can also take all that information and forward that off. So I work with customers who use Splunk, where they aggregate everything into Splunk. And you could do the same sort of thing with Tower, just forward all of that out. Okay, so with that in mind, I want to switch over just to kind of give you an idea real quick and show you a demo in action. And let me start off first of all with the ONTAP environment. So what I want to do here is I want to build out a new storage virtual machine using Ansible. And so I've got my log back in here. I've got my environment set up. Make sure my network didn't get messed up. Okay. All right. So if I look right now at my storage virtual machine situation, I have one that I've defined. It's called web. So what I want to do is build out a new SVM. So pretty straightforward, very similar to what we showed in that example. Now the playbook that I'm using is actually shown here. This should look somewhat familiar. So I'm using that same module that I showed you before. I'm providing these different values. Down here I'm providing basically connection information like the host name, the username, password, that sort of thing. One thing that you'll notice that's a little bit different there, though, is that I actually have a construct here called with items. Essentially, that's a loop. So I'm looping over this variable that's defined here. So I can define a variable and then take action based on the value of that variable. And there's different ways that you can provide variables. In this case, all I'm doing is drawing this information out of a file. But with Ansible Tower, I have the ability to actually display a graphical interface to users whenever they kick off automation and actually have them input the values to variables. So that's another way to actually collect information. So here, again, I'm creating the SVM, and then I'm actually going through and I'm modifying my default export policy. Here I'm going to enable NFS and show mount, and then I'm doing a few other things as well, just to really complete the configuration of the SVM. So one thing you'll note, perhaps, is that this is all in my GitHub repository, and that's another common practice. So we talk a lot about DevOps, and if you're an application developer, then certainly you have some sort of a source code control system where you store your code, updates the code, that sort of thing. And the idea with automation is to do the same thing. So treat your infrastructure as code, so that if anything happens, you can always go back and build from that. And one of the nice things with Tower too is it can follow that life cycle that you might be used to with an application environment. So you may have a main trunk that's being used in your production environment today. You can create a new branch that you want to test out new things with your automation and have Ansible reference that branch. And then once that's validated, then you can actually merge that in, and that becomes your new standard moving forward. So, okay, so here we've got our playbook written. So that's really the main thing that we need to do as a user. So let's switch over to Ansible Tower now. And let's see. Okay. So again, when you log in, you are provided a dashboard. So this gives you a real, bird's eye view of your environment. So again, automation that's recently been run over here on the right. Templates I'll talk about in just a minute. These are really the playbooks that have been running, as well as some other facts about the system. So we built our playbook. It's in our Git repo. So how do we actually reference that in Ansible Tower? And that's through what's called a project. So through a project, which I have defined here, NetApp, all I do is create a new project and I reference in my case, my Git repository. It could be a directory on disk if you want to, but again, mostly what we see is people are using some sort of a source repository for all of their automation. So this is really like a project is really like your source repository. I do have an inventory defined. In my case, it's just a static inventory, much like that first example that we saw in the presentation. So then in order to marry everything together into something that I can actually run, what we do is define a template. So I've defined a template here that called create a new SVM. And if we look at how we marry that together, I specified my inventory right here, my project, which you saw, and then within the project, I can pick a particular playbook. So I've got a couple in here. I've got one I wrote just to show me the volumes that are defined on the cluster. So I'm just picking that create one. And then I do have a credential as well. We could visit that topic a little bit later. So now I've got something that I can run. So let's go ahead and kick that off. And I'll do that here. And you'll see once that kicks off, it's going to kick me over into the screen where we actually see what's going on as everything is executing. Uh-oh. Oh, no. Oh, something failed. So, well, I'm not sure what happened there, but let's just go through this a little bit, though. What you'll see is we did have a play in here, and you can see that this actually is printing out what was shown in our playbook. So this was, you know, what we listed as the name. And the same thing with the task. So every task that we named in our playbook, you can follow along in the output as it's actually taking place. And I'm not sure why this failed, but in any case, so this did actually wind up failing here. Looks like I have a credentials issue. So it looks like maybe Greg the Hammer Valentine got me, Matt. Okay, there's one reference.
Nice, you're on the board. Good work, Trey.
Oh my gosh. No one will believe me if I told you I ran through this like 5 or 6 times this morning, but in any case. So the end result of this, though, is if this had worked, what we would see, I wonder if this is, I'm just timed out. Oh man, something went wrong. Okay, anyway, we would have a new storage virtual machine over here. So I apologize it didn't quite work out. Sometimes the live demos don't. So what we've done, though, is we built a playbook that in a very simple way allows us to describe what it is we want that controller to look like. So in our case, it was, I want to build out a new SVM that's enabled for NFS. And so we've got that in place. So that's really more focused on one area, right? So the storage team may be responsible for these sorts of things. I wanted to show you just briefly kind of, you know, what's possible, though, in another instance here. With another type of template. And so in this particular case, in the previous case, you know, we built a template, we referenced our project, and we picked one playbook inside of that. We said, we want you to go run this playbook that creates a new SVM. Here, what we're doing is we're building out what's called a workflow template. And like I mentioned, this allows you to stitch together multiple individual templates. So here I have one where the whole template is starting from the very beginning, provisioning a new system, and then going through the process of getting that configured, installing the application software so that that is ready to go. So you can see I'm provisioning a system here. I'm updating my inventory here. Satellite is a management tool for Red Hat Enterprise Linux systems. So I'm registering to that so I get software updates. Transitioning really to a different team. So this is more the application team here that's installing a middleware component in the application itself. And then finally transitioning over to the security team to run the security scan and make sure that it's compliant. So within Tower, then, I've tapped into 3 different organizations, each with their own domain expertise, and I've built out a workflow to build a brand new system that is able to serve an application. So I did that end to end within Ansible Tower. So you can do that within Tower or through the REST API. You could also do that through external tools as well. So that's a little tour of Ansible Tower. And just real quick to wrap up before I hand it back over. Yeah, so what we've done then is really kind of start from scratch, right? We built out something to create a new SVM. Then we've looked at how we can take automation written by different teams and really build that up. So if you're interested, there's a variety of ways to actually start kicking the tires, as shown here. So that first link, the Getting Started, that gets you access to Ansible, so you can start working with building playbooks, running at the command line, kind of getting a feel for the language. And then if you want, you can also take advantage of Ansible Tower through a trial. And then, like I mentioned, we offer a variety of training, and the workshops, I think, have been particularly effective in getting people introduced and exposed to Ansible, just kind of generating ideas about, hey, these are the kinds of things that I can do with Ansible, and then learning that, you know, it's not so hard to do. It's pretty straightforward. So with that, I think we have a few minutes left. I'll hand it back over to Matt. So I appreciate the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Trey.
Yeah.
Trey, you absolutely are a styling, profiling, limousine riding, jet flying, kiss stealing, wheeling dealing son of a gun. I know it's been said before. I was pretty sure I could do that from
That was good.
I read it just in case.
That was good.
I want to make sure we got all of our questions answered here. There were a few that popped up.
Sure. Let's see here.
I think they were Trey focused.
All right, let me go back through here.
Yeah, I took a pass at those. Trey, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay. No, I'm sure you're great.
One of the questions was AWX versus Ansible Tower. What were the capabilities?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so AWX is the upstream version of Ansible Tower. So that's really the open source version that would be community supported. But yeah, it's think of it, if you're familiar with like Fedora and Red Hat Enterprise Linux, it's kind of the same relationship, right? So everything that we do is open source. So we draw expertise and code from the community, like from Fedora. That becomes the basis of our product, in this case, Ansible Tower or Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And then what we do, we actually feed back into open source. So, yep, that's that relationship.
Yep. Yeah, and I point out that if I remember right, Ansible Tower allows you to integrate to the Insight Analytics feature that's new at cloud.redhat.com, but AWX doesn't allow that use, if I remember right.
Oh, yes. That's true. So when I mentioned in the slides that, when we had that picture of the kind of the cake, with the 3 tiers, That top tier is the software as a service offering, and that, you're correct, that's hosted on cloud.redhat.com. And so the capabilities in there with regards to analytics across the organization and the content hub, those are not part of AWX. That's true.
Okay. Good. I'm glad it reinforces my knowledge, so that's great. Good. I don't need a King Kong Bundy slam on that one, so that's awesome. So thanks.
Nice.
All right.
There was also another question, Matt, in the Q&A regarding if there are any Ansible modules for NetApp Cloud Insights. And so at this point, we don't have any. However, whoever asked that question, it was sent anonymously. If there's something specifically you're looking to do with Cloud Insights via Ansible, definitely let us know, because we're obviously creating more and more modules. As my tag team partner, Ken Jarris, we went from 60 to 90 modules. And so I'm sure that if we understand what you're looking to do and we have other customers in that same situation, we can put in a request to have additional modules created.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to emphasize is our ability to have this. This is actually all built in. So we talked about these modules, talked about, people oftentimes think that, oh, I got to get started with Ansible, and then I've got to go get those modules from NetApp. Actually, we are one of Red Hat's 6 partners that when you install Ansible, you're ready to go. You don't have to get anything else to get the NetApp modules started. Those are actually part of the Ansible. What you install is part of the Ansible load, whether you're doing Ansible or Ansible Tower. So that gets us, again, a jump start on having to get those capabilities going. We have a series of blog entries on how to get started as well as a tutorial, and I'll put that link in the chat so you can take a look at that as well. It'll go through how to install Ansible, leverage getting started with playbooks, and get you started in that path as well if you're interested. So I'll send that link out in the chat here shortly.
Oh, and Matt, I did want to just say that my demo failure, it was actually all planned.
Oh, good.
So that I can make, I did that just so I could make reference to the Undertaker.
Yes.
Ding, ding. Who took my demo down.
You're the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be. So I wanted to we're short on time. You're out of time here, so I wanted to thank everyone that joined. Quick note: everyone's going to get a link to fill out to get their Technology Luchador, The Fight is Real shirt. We'll get those out to everybody who participated. We appreciate it. I'll also send the contact information for all the presenters. If you have any questions, let us know. Both Red Hat and NetApp are very proof of concept friendly. It doesn't have to be hard. We can absolutely get you guys the tools and help you through things if you're interested in trying things out. So with that said, thanks everybody, and more to follow.